the next part, we are going to, I believe, listen to a song. So it's the song challenge. So all I'm gonna say, pay attention to lyrics. Let's watch it. Okay, so we have the questions for this song. So the first one is feeling my way through the darkness, guided by a beating heart. I can't tell where the journey will end, but I know where to start. So this is the intro part of the song, true or false? The second question is, welcome to Hotel California, such a lovely place, such a lovely place, such a lovely face. This is the end part of the song. Let's see, true or false? Okay, we got the results in. So 84% for true for the first question and 63% for false for the second question. Just before I go to the instructors, I actually listen to Wake Me Up every morning on my way to uni, so pun intended, it wakes me up. Let's go.
I'm a little biased because I already knew the lyrics for this song before listening to it. So for question number 1, I'm going to agree with the 36 students that voted for yes or voted for true.
I've heard my dad listening to both of these songs. I'm also completely biased on both questions because I can tell that they're completely different songs from when I heard. So yeah, I'd agree with the 36 on the first question and the 27 on the second.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to ask you, Yusuf, if you knew the second song, if you knew who the Eagles were, because this is probably our generation and your generation versus our parents' generation.
Yeah.
Of course, I love Hotel California. I can sing it to you right now if you want. But yeah, the second song would be Hotel California by the Eagles. That's the only song that I know for the Eagles, by the way.
Me too. Do you know any other song for the Eagles?
No, I'm also biased.
So I see the majority agrees with what the audience answer, right?
Exactly.
Great. Okay. That was great. Let's, I guess, move on to the next part. So yeah, the next part is the lecture challenge. We will be hearing a lecture by Jennifer Miss Kimmins. And well, the questions are right in front of you. So come on, guys, let's listen to this.
I get the question a lot, is petroleum engineering going away? And I can firmly say no, it's not. No matter how you look at the future of energy and energy needs, petroleum aspects are going to play a role in it for a long time. We hear a lot about energy transition. Well, transition's not a snap of the fingers. It doesn't happen overnight. When we look at the energy transition, natural gas, oil is going to play an important role, but natural gas is extremely important. It's a very clean burning fuel. You know, electricity has to come from someplace, and natural gas, when you look at any projections, plays a big role in that. So we see petroleum engineering being something that's very long-term and definitely still a positive career to get into. My name is Jennifer Miss Kimmins, and I am the Petroleum Engineering Department Head at the Colorado School of Mines.
You're listening to The Conveyor, the podcast that brings you the latest research, new discoveries, and world-changing ideas from Colorado School of Mines. How has petroleum engineering evolved over time?
You know, it's interesting. We still drill wells. That's what we've been doing for 100 years. But how it's changed, obviously, is in the technology and the extreme conditions, I would say, that we work under now. You know, we're drilling wells in very unique locations, places that have some challenging areas like deep sea, deep ocean areas that we're drilling wells in. We're drilling and producing areas pretty much around the world. So I think the basics are very much similar, but how we approach that has had to change over time, including areas like sustainability and license to operate. We have to be very cognizant of how we're working in the environment and with local communities.
What defines petroleum engineering?
So what defines petroleum engineering? Petroleum engineering is really focused on the upstream production of hydrocarbons. And so when we look at petroleum engineering, a lot of people think, well, refining or that type of thing. That's really downstream. With upstream, we are involved in the production, the drilling and the production of wells, along with the reservoir components and maximizing the recovery of hydrocarbons from different reservoirs. There's then midstream, which is the transportation of the fluids from wherever the oil field is to the refinery. We do sometimes get involved in the midstream, but for the most part, petroleum engineering is focused on the upstream.
Okay, so that was the end of the lecture portion. So the questions are: Professor Jennifer is working for A, University of Houston, B, Texas Tech University, C, Colorado School of Mines. So that's the first question. And the second one is: Professor Jennifer agrees with the idea that oil and gas is going away. So true or false? Okay, so Colorado School of Mines won by 79% for the first question, of course. And the second question, 63% of the audience went with false. So let's see our instructors.
So for the first question, I think she stated, and then I think the interviewer, whoever the male's voice, also stated that this was the Colorado School of Mines. For the second question, I think what stood out the most to me, and I agree with false on this one, is that especially towards the beginning of the lecture, she states that the oil and gas in this petroleum field is still one to get into. So she's promoting the entrance into this field, which you typically wouldn't do if it's going away.
Yeah, and then in the second part, when she talks about a little bit, what is upstream, what is downstream, then the energy transition. Maybe that could have driven a little bit some of the people away, because she puts more sentences in a negative form. So maybe, but yeah, totally agree with you. Yeah, she says that at the very beginning. Yeah, so we agree with the majority as well.
It's false.
Both of questions.
Yep, I have to agree with you guys. At the beginning of the video, I think or the audio, I think she clearly said that she's like the chair of the department at the Colorado School of Mines, or professor at the Colorado School of Mines. She's saying that it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And even if she didn't say that, I'm gonna have to agree with her, or I'm gonna have to say that oil and gas is not going anywhere, just because I work in the oil and gas. So
same here.
I want to get my paycheck, guys.
You're all just biased.
Agreed. I would have changed my major.
Exactly.
But also I want to hear from everyone. So Yusuf and Garhi, let's hear from you.
All right. So somewhere in the middle, maybe like near the end of her first part of talking, she did mention the Colorado School of Mines, and then the interviewer also did mention the Colorado School of Mines in the beginning of his cue, I guess. And then in the beginning, she seemed completely kind of sure that it wasn't going to go away. She said that she was asked the question multiple times, and said that things don't just happen in a snap. So yeah, I agree with the majority on both sides.
Okay. I guess we can move on to the next part.
Hopefully over the last 150 years, we've learned a lot of lessons about how to do resource extraction safely and to do it with minimal impact on the environment. As we're making these big changes very quickly, let's take those lessons, apply them to what we're trying to do in the future, and do it as well as we possibly can. I'm John Bradford, Vice President of Global Initiatives at Colorado School of Mines.
You're listening to The Conveyor, the podcast that brings you the latest research, new discoveries, and world-changing ideas from Colorado School of Mines. To begin, what is the Global Energy Future Initiative at Mines?
The Global Energy Future Initiative is really about eliminating CO2 emissions from our energy economy. So it's meeting the net zero challenge, which is perhaps one of the biggest challenges that our society has faced ever in history, possibly. So it's an enormous challenge. The key elements that we bring to this discussion are expertise in oil and gas, critical minerals and metals, clean water, carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, advanced energy systems, which includes renewable energy, and supply chain transparency, which links all of these different elements together in an integrative sort of way. Also, since we're a institution of higher education, I think that we can be a trusted, objective voice in the conversation to help with some of the surrounding issues. Of course, many of the issues that we're talking about here are politically sensitive and controversial in some cases. So it's a challenge for us, I think, to try and navigate those, but I think it's important for us to do it in a responsible and effective way.
Yeah, it is important when tackling so many challenges, especially through so many channels. It seems like then there's a need for more public awareness on these various issues and viewpoints.
I think that's true. Awareness and acceptance, right? So it's a change that's happening. It's something that we need to accept. And, my hope is that at some point in the near future, we'll get to a point where the political discussion doesn't revolve around whether it's actually happening or whether we need to deal with it, but how we go about dealing with it, right? So there are going to be policy differences. There will be different ways to manage the situation, and we can have political discussions about that. But the reality is that it's a change that's going to have a big impact on us as a society.
Well, politics is often key. So how has something like the Biden administration's climate plan addressed issues towards future energy change?
So one of the key components of the Biden plan is that we can drive economic growth with the energy transition. So there's a perception out there that, if we transition our energy system where there's a higher proportion of renewables, we drive changes in our construction that leads to better efficiency, but that we're still that we're continuing to use oil and gas, but with this other element, which is carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration. There's a huge amount of economic input that's required to build up these other things. So if we're going to build the infrastructure for CCUS and build the technologies that are required to make that happen, that will employ a lot of people. If we start building more solar farms and wind farms, that's going to employ a lot of people. If we transition more coal-fired power plants to gas-fired power plants, that's going to drive a lot of jobs. There's some other components of the infrastructure that have to change too. So carbon, if we can figure out how to capture it at sources, if we can figure out how to capture it from the atmosphere, then we have to push it around, right? We have to mobilize that carbon to places where we're storing it. And storing it can be in geologic reservoirs, or storing it might be in producing other commodity products like other types of plastics that use CO2 as a feedstock, or storing it in concrete is another possibility. We have to get the carbon from the source to where we're going to store it somehow, and that requires, construction of pipelines and things like that.
So it sounds like there's some big economic promises with the plan, but what might be overlooked?
There's something, and this really isn't in the public conversation yet, although it's, recognized by people that are working on the issues, which is an enormous growth in the raw supply of minerals and metals that are needed to create renewable energy technology, such as, solar and wind. So if we transition a significant part of our energy supply to renewables, we're going to have to grow the supply of critical metals and minerals. That includes base metals like copper and aluminum and things like that, but also rare earth elements that are needed for, advanced battery systems and that sort of thing.
How much of an increase?
Some of those elements, we're going to have to increase the supply by something like 1,000% by 2050, which is just an enormous challenge. So we have to be able to find the reserves of those elements, develop them, mine them, extract them, and be able to do that quickly, sort of on the, a few decades time scale, to produce all the materials that we need for the energy transition. And that's just an enormous challenge. And in some sense, this isn't so much part of the conversation yet, but it needs to be, and it's something that we have to accept as a society. So as we transition away from oil and gas to renewables, in some sense, we're trading one non-renewable resource for another. So, the supply of those metals and minerals that are needed for this are also limited and a finite resource. So we have to manage that carefully. We have to accept that that's something that we do, as we make the energy transition, and we have to make probably some regulatory and policy changes to make it possible to do that on the time frame that will help us meet our net zero goal, sort of at the 2050 goal that many governments and companies are setting for themselves.
So then the real challenge is to efficiently develop these renewable resources, which actually must be made from non-renewable resources, all in a very quick amount of time.
Yeah, exactly. There's another point that I want to make about the regulation. So this is in the mining sector. My understanding is that it takes from, identification of a resource to having a mine that's fully up and running and producing the raw ore, largely because the regulatory process is involved. That can be, 10, 20, maybe even more years to get that up and running. So we're talking to get a brand new mine up and running, we're talking about something that's on the same scale as that we want to get to net zero. And so for certain types of resources, if we need to increase the supply by 100, 200, 500% of certain kinds of resources, how is that going to be possible if it takes 10, 20 years to even get a new mine up and running? So something has to change there, right? So if we want to do all these things, we have to be willing to change in multiple areas in the way that we're operating. So. I'll use this as an opportunity to expand on another facet of this that we haven't talked about yet.
Go for it.
The area of national security. So our national security is improved by international partners, other countries recognizing us as a stable and reliable partner. So if we're rapidly shifting policies, that creates some challenges in that regard. Right now, the U.S. doesn't control the rare earth market, for example. That's controlled primarily by China. So for national security purposes, that puts us in a vulnerable position. So if we have to figure out how to address that and address our own production capabilities and address our own role in that supply chain for those critical elements that are so important for this transition. As you mentioned, the global politics are key. So having cooperation between countries that are both producing the resources and then utilizing them, and having sort of global policies that everyone agrees on that can address these environmental and social concerns that we have. I think that's going to be really critical to doing this well.
To wrap up, what does Minds and the Initiative hope to gain from the research and collaboration around the world to solving these climate change problems?
I think that the problem is so big that it would be misleading probably to say that we're going to solve all those problems ourselves at Minds, right? That's not the reality of the situation. But we do partner with other universities in the U.S. We partner with universities and governments and companies working worldwide. And it's through those sorts of partnerships that the globe is really going to be able to address the bigger problem. But I think that our sort of unique sets of expertise make it possible for us to sort of be a central locus for that sort of activity and bring the right people together to solve the problems. A lot of investment is going to be made in developing these technologies, and that's an opportunity for us to have a role in that and to pull in the research dollars that we need to support the university and support all the activities that we do.
Okay, so that was a very interesting podcast. So the questions are, question number 1, Professor Bradford is working for A, University of Houston, B, Texas Tech University, C, Marietta College, D, all choices are wrong. And the second question is, at the end of the podcast, Dr. Bradford answered the following question. What does Minds and the Initiative hope to gain from the research and collaboration around the world to solve in these climate change problems? So, yes or no? Okay, so the results are in. Question 1, 88% for all choices are wrong. And question 2, 69% for yes. Let's go to our instructors. Maybe we can start with Rahima.
Yeah, I agree with them because all choices were wrong. I am pretty sure I heard that it was Vice President of Global Initiatives of Colorado School of Mines. So that's audience was right. And the second question, yeah, definitely the last question was this one.
I'd say that was most likely for the second question. If people were paying attention, it would be easy to spot because since it's the last thing, you don't really have to worry too much about having it in the middle or having it in a certain part. But in the first question, yeah, I heard Colorado School of Mines, and then I instantly just grazed all the questions, and it wasn't there. So yeah, I'd agree with 88%.
Yeah, there's also a trick. Well, I heard also Colorado School of Mines, but there's a trick. If you look at this guy's T-shirt, it on the right hand or on the left hand side it says Mines, so that also helps like show you that he works at Colorado School of Mines. So all the other choices are wrong. And yeah, he did answer this question at the end for part number 2. Even though he didn't give a clear answer to the question, but he addressed that question.
I think a good key to keep in mind, especially for the second question, so I mean, they did directly state the question, but even if you missed it, the entire lecture prior to the question was foreshadowing this because he's talking about this global initiative and how it's going to take so long and how it's going to require everything in global policies. And then after the question continues to talk about how this is going to require countries to work together, the ones that make the resources or have the resources and the other ones to bring in policies. So kind of everything prior to the question and after is talking about this whole collaboration. I think that might, if you miss the question, still kind of guide you towards the right answer.
Yeah. And something extra from the 2 questions that I think my biggest takeaway, the thing that shocked me the most on the podcast is how long it takes to set up a mine. That when he talks about the raw materials and stuff, I had no idea that it took so long for bureaucracy and everything to set and start actually producing start the production on a mine. 10 years. It's something unbelievable.
Oh, wow, that was some great responses, and I think we are good to go to the next part. So the next part is the Audible challenge.